We are live.
Awesome.
So, I wanted to introduce you, first of all, to somebody who needs no introduction. But, I've known Jacqueline for over a year now, since we met in Melbourne in a real estate conference about being a commercial buyer's agent. Jacqueline's been practicing in architecture in London for 4 years.
Well, no, it's been a lot longer than that. I was practicing as an architect back in 2005. Yeah. So all the way through up until I had kids. And then once I had kids, I started to get interested in something else.
Wow. So, 2005, 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And now Jacqueline lives in New Zealand, and I, of course, live in Australia. So we're both here in London, but not just London. This is a beautiful countryside. If you haven't been to England, I'm sure you've heard of the Ascot horse races.
Mm-hmm.
We're actually in Ascot, which is a beautiful leafy part of London, just south of London, southwest, and it's a blue sky. You can actually hear little birds tweeting,
Mm-hmm.
but if you read between the lines, they actually are saying tweet, 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 tweet. They are literally saying the onomatopoeia that we are always using. Can you hear that as well, or is that just me?
Yeah, it's there. It's definitely there.
What I noticed was there was a hawk over here.
It just flew over
Three
again.
of them.
Mm.
I'm not going to try to twist the camera to catch it because they do fly by quite fast.
Mm-hmm.
It's an interesting mix here because you're in a backyard, we're a private home.
Mm-hmm.
We have a water feature trickling on one side, a water featuring in the other. You have the tweetering of birds. And from what I understand is that there was a fox in the backyard a few nights ago.
Yeah.
And you've had to install deer fences because the deer were eating the flowers. So this is really, when you're thinking of Hollywood, this is exactly what you'd wish to be. It's the kind of house in the country that we all dream of in Sydney, in Australia.
Mm-hmm.
What about you guys in New Zealand? Is this the picturesque, idyllic background?
I mean, it's beautiful. Look at it. What's not to love? And the weather, which I have been reminded about because I haven't been in London for over 10 years. I lived here for 10 years and had one experience of a summer that's like this. So it's a completely different experience. And I think that because most summers aren't like this, we're not having this experience generally, being in London. I know when I lived in London, I had a flat on the top floor of a building, and our garden was behind two other gardens. You know, you had to come out of your house, and the garden flat had their garden, and then the level two flat had the garden behind that, and then the top floor had the garden behind that. You know, so it wasn't exactly the indoor outdoor flow that we have in Australia and New Zealand. So it's different to be having this experience in London, and well, close to London. Yeah, yeah, it's beautiful.
And when you think about architecture, central London has some of the most incredible pieces of marble and granite and sculptures and glass and steel frames. So there's a lot of beauty to see. But what we're actually going to talk about today, and this is a little bit of a move aside from property and real estate and the type of things that we've been talking about the last few days, might be a little bit hot and spicy. So if I don't know if I need to do a trigger warning at the beginning of this, but it seems like every second thing now on Facebook and social media has a trigger warning. So hey, why not? Trigger warning.
I know what you need. You need a chili rating, right? We, we did a festival once, and we had a spiciness rating, right? Where it was a no chili value all the way to like a 5 chili value by the time you got to the end of the what was being offered, right? So maybe you need a chili rating.
There was a specific chili, a jalapeno,
Yeah.
called the it's not the California Reaper, but it's one of the states in the US. Can't remember which one. Carolina. It was Carolina Reaper.
Right.
It's the number one spiciest little chili that you can. So before we go to the Carolina Reaper, I'll give you a bit of a spicy warning there.
Spicy.
But
Awesome.
Jacqueline, you're going to. I'll introduce you to some of the people in Australia that are in this space as well with dating and relationships, and they do quite often have a spiciness rating on their things. So I know that when we're back in Australia, we're going to have a lot of talking about this kind of stuff. But I wanted to ask you a few questions. And I know that a lot of people here that, at least the people in my circles that talk to me about property and real estate, quite often they're coupled, meaning
Mhm.
that sometimes I get single people asking me to help them as a buyer's agent, but quite often it's a couple that are asking for help. And it's usually a couple with kids that are already super busy in their lives. A couple of things that we've been talking about off camera is how you can keep things alive when the two of you are doing different jobs, and the rules that change when you have kids to when you're married before kids.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me a bit about your experience with speaking to couples and running wolf packs
Mm-hmm.
and introducing what you've been talking about in your books and your seminars and your workshops,
Mm-hmm.
specifically about couples and how to grow together.
Oh gosh, that's such a juicy topic. Um, and one thing that, as we were walking today, I don't know if you recall, I mentioned it when we fall into what I've previously called automatic parenting or automatic relating. And one of my first mentors called it the what do you call it? Family trance, right? When you fall into the family trance. And yeah, because I wanted to not copy what he was doing, I called it something different. And my experience has been when I had children, I nosedived into automatic parenting. And what I mean by that is I all of the way that I wanted to parent or relate went out the window. And I started parenting in the way that my mother parented me. I started relating in the way that my mother related to everyone, to herself, first and foremost, and then everyone around her. And I remember having this face palm moment, that, oh my God. And I realized I've turned into my mother. And no judgment against my beautiful mother. She's the sweetest, most gentle soul who you've now met. Uh, but it wasn't authentic to me and the way that I wanted to be in relationship. It was simply what had become normalized by what I'd observed and what was modeled to me as a child. So having awareness around that is the first thing, that we are literally and very physically going to nosedive into these patterns of relating and parenting and living that are just simply what's being normalized by what we've observed as children. That's the first thing. But then being able to spot those patterns and chuck a spanner in, right, to disrupt them, because that's what we want to do. If they're not working out for us, and I want to preface that for some people, it's all good, right? Everything's rosy, everything's trucking along, and I don't work with those people, right? The ones that are everything's like happy, happy, joy, joy, where things are going great. But for the people who are like, hang on, the rose tinted glasses have fallen off and it's not like I thought it was going to be. My parenting journey is not like I thought it was going to be. My relationship isn't what I thought it was going to be. Those are the people that I work with, because we all had those rose tinted glasses firmly fixed, right? And I know for me that when I first was a parent and those rose tinted glasses fell off, I was like, why didn't anybody tell me? Why? And of course they do. They do. However, our rose tinted glasses are so rose, we either don't listen or we don't hear or we don't have enough awareness of what actually happens when we become parents, when we get married, when we move in with someone. We hold on to this vision of what we think it's going to be. And then when it isn't, and for so many of us, we don't want to admit that it's not how we thought it was going to be, and it's not the vision or the picture. There's shame in it and there's guilt in it, and it's one of the reasons why I want to write books, why I have a book coming out very soon, because for me, I was too embarrassed to put my hand up and go, this isn't worked out like I thought it was going to work out. And I was too in that, like the shame of that, feeling like a bad parent, like a bad partner, like a bad person, that I wouldn't put my hand up for a course or a program or a coach or, anybody, because then they would know that I wasn't, it wasn't all that. It wasn't the picture that I thought it was going to be. But behind closed doors, I'd read a book, right? So um, I think that's a long answer to your question, but there's so much in there that isn't being spoken about in terms of how couples end up in the places that they find themselves in and don't necessarily have anybody to talk to about it, or can't necessarily put their hand up to say, hey, I would really love some help in this area, but I don't know where to find it, or I don't even know what that looks like, or I don't even know what's possible. And that's another thing that you and I spoke about. I don't know what's possible because this is all I know, right? And understanding that once we start to see the cycles that start to play out when we nosedive into automatic parenting and automatic relating, um, we can start to design our relationships and design our parenting in a way that's actually authentic to us, not just what was modeled and what feels natural. And this is the thing, it feels natural, but it's not, right? It's just what's being normalized. And to actually do something different actually feels really unnatural, yet it's more authentic to who we are and our truth when we're really honest with ourselves. So, yeah, long answer to your question. Did I get to some of it?
Yes, you did. So this is the bit where I give you that trigger warning. So trigger warning. We spoke a bit about, and we're going to talk about vagina. So if you're ready to switch off, switch off. The reality is that childbirth is now experienced by both parents quite often, which means that when you're a man and your wife is a woman and you're going through the childbirth procedure, you're in the same room, and your wife is lying on the table, she's not seeing what's happening on the other side, you're witnessing what's happening on the other side. And you and I spoke about the trauma, the effect, and the uh, maybe the memories that come through from that. But it's something that isn't spoken about and is actually happening quite often. Uh, that doesn't mean that the room should be private and you should stop people from experiencing what they want to experience. However, the duality of it, the flip side of it, is that there also needs to be some support, some understanding, some transition afterwards to normalize, to use your word, or to get back into having a relationship where you're comfortable, you're both on a, we can talk about the experience, etc. And some of that, it might not be talked about often, but the better hospitals are talking about that now. So help me understand, without being too spicy and scaring too many people, but help me understand what your teaching has been on that, especially with couples and going through vaginal birth, seeing a vaginal birth, experiencing it, and then building up together towards intimacy, uh, not wanting to hurt your partner after seeing your partner go through something like that. How does that transfer into the relationship building and the emotional reconnecting afterwards?
No, there's so much there. And one of the things that we were talking about before we jumped on camera was the experience that men go through. And for me, as a woman, being on the other side of the coin, so to speak, other side of the experience, when a woman is in labor and she's going through the process of birth, it's like you are in this completely different world, right? There's no sort of concept of time. You're in a different state, and you're in a different state because of what has to happen, right? You're trying to get something the size of a watermelon out of something the size of something that isn't, and it's a process. And I won't even go into to how we birth and how it's so far away from the way that women should be birthing. The fact that women now do have support, because I was speaking to my mum a couple of days ago where she was alone, right? She was alone in her room. The midwives or the doctors, the nurses were around, but nobody was actually with her. And I was just like, oh, I had a doula at my birth. I had my husband, who was amazing. I had a student midwife who I thought I didn't actually want to have there, because when they asked me, are you okay with a student midwife? I was like, hell no, I don't want to, you know. But when she was there, I actually was so grateful that she was there, because her presence was amazing, right? But one thing that really landed for me was that men are now witnessing this experience, but they're not in that zone that the woman is in, right? They're external to that. They're witnessing it from outside of that space, where they're very conscious of what is going on with time. They're very conscious of what's going on with the midwives or the doctors, or the pressure that can be put on women about time. Oh, she hasn't, dilated soon enough, or we need to get things going. All of that sort of side of thing, they're very much a party to. But no one is talking to the men about what they're actually witnessing and what they're experiencing when they observe their wife, their partner, their beloved, right, go through these experiences that aren't always the most easeful. Some of them are very, very traumatic, and no one's talking to the men. And when you were speaking, it was like, there's a huge thing that happens. There's huge changes that happen in a relationship. There's huge changes that happen in a woman's body when she becomes pregnant, when she's had children, after she's had children, changes to the way that she relates sexually, which we've discussed as well, changes to the relationship in terms of now a man who was, putting, and you've said vagina, so I can say penis, when, he's putting his penis somewhere where before it was different, and now he's seen a baby's head come out of that place, and now he's wanting to, there's a lot there, right? So how do we navigate all of that and grow in the relationship where we can have both partners talking to each other about what they've experienced without making the other wrong? Because so many of the couples that I work with, they're just not seeing each other anymore. They're not seeing the pain or the hurt or the challenge or what they've navigated. They're just coming from their own position, right? And they're not able to see what the other has been through. And one of the things that you and I were discussing was when I was at the baby show, and I'd been presenting at the baby show, and no one was talking to these men, right? Because when women have babies, it's all about the woman and it's all about the baby, and the man is just kind of pushed aside. Or these men were coming around at this baby show, and they were, these buggies and these massive plastic bags of plastic stuff that babies don't even need, but they're all buying it, right? Because that's what you do. And everyone is focused on the woman, and these men, and I actually let the woman go past, and I met the man's eye, right? And I said, how are you? And they were so shocked that anyone was even speaking to them, which blew me away. And some of them actually broke down when I started asking them, how are you? What's going on for you? What's your experience been? And they were just so floored by being spoken to. And that's what I see that's missing, right? When I, as a woman, am able to speak to a man and want to hear his experience, not just lay my own in him, right? Or blame him for it, right? And when men are able to do the same for women, when they're able to see their experience and want to understand it, then we start to set up and create a space where relationships can grow through all of these changes that no one tells you about before you have kids. Right? Because I reckon if people didn't, nobody would have kids, right? To know that's going to happen, and that your partner, your wife, right, your partner is going to feel so touched out by the babies and the toddlers. She is not going to want you to touch her at all, right? And all you want to do as the man is come in and create intimacy with your partner who was there before the kids came along. And there's so much that shifts and changes when the focus goes on to the children and we forget about the relationship that was there before them. And if that relationship isn't being nurtured, we're in trouble, right? Because that's the thing that was there before the children came along. That's the thing that we want to be there after the children leave. But if we don't nurture that and it just becomes all about the children, which happens so often because of unmet needs that we have as mums and dads from our own childhood, right? Which then become the focus. The children become the focus, right? And we lose touch with each other. So there's another big answer for your question, but there's a lot there, you know, and with awareness, with a an openness, with a joint desire to come together and learn and grow, right, and get out of blame, right? Blaming, shaming, complaining, right? Which is such a huge part of our relating old relationship technology. Like I love to speak about a new relationship technology that doesn't have naming, shaming, blaming, complaining, right? Where we're taking ownership of our own triggers, because you were using that word, our own feelings, not the other person. Yeah, that becomes the person that we love to blame. Oh, blaming my husband was my little, that was my go-to. So a whole different relationship technology that makes it possible to navigate our way powerfully through these changes, right? Um, where we can transform our relationship. Right? Where I love to talk about alchemy, which is taking the shitty bits or the trucks, sorry, the 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 gritty bits, the no swearing, the challenging parts, the hard parts of our relationships, and turn them into gold. Right?
We're going to take a quick commercial break here. Not really, but first of all, I wanted to flash my Batman socks. Sorry, too much of a gap there, right? I didn't want to flash. I wanted to flash my Batman socks.
I was going to say.
So, one thing that you mentioned that I'm just going to translate to people not from Australia or New Zealand, you said buggy. So when we have a pram or we have a stroller,
Yep.
a great New Zealand company, this is not sponsored by them, has made a buggy. They've actually named their stroller.
Yeah.
Is it a beach buggy?
Yeah, maybe.
Beach buggy, maybe. It's a large wheeled stroller that comes apart and goes up and down just with one hand. So you've got one little squeeze thing. The wheels come off so you can put it on a bus or inside a smaller car. So in Australia, we buy lots of them. It's probably the number one most famous stroller that we use in Australia. So you say buggy, like the men pushing a buggy. So I'm just translating for the non-New Zealanders and Australians. But that's what buggy is.
Yeah.
So it's not a commercial break, but I just thought I'd just come back to that part of the sentence. I'd love to ask you on a slightly deeper level, and if this isn't the right time because your book is about to come out, so I don't want to run into something that will be published very soon. Is it okay if I ask you about Black Magician?
Oh, yeah, of course.
So now one thing that I've noticed is every now and then there's a plane overhead. So I'm going to give a beat just for the plane to go, and then I'll ask you the questions.
Sure.
And here we are in 3, 2, 1. So tell me a bit about the Black Magician and what we were talking about earlier with the way couples interact.
Oh, this is so good. So this is about our modes of relating, and I'd had some idea of what like a codependent relationship was like, where there's a dependency on each other. And this is our primary mode of relating. It's what we do, right? It's obvious that in our relationships, we depend on each other financially. Woman has children, man provides security, stability, right? There's a dependency. And of course, there's there's a natural dependency that we have on each other as humans. And so I'm prefacing that. And there's a level when it becomes dysfunctional, right? Where we're joined at the hip, where we can't do anything without the other, where it becomes this mutual dependency which keeps us stuck. And I remember I would be teaching about relationships where, two people and they're coming through life, and then all of a sudden they're like, ooh, I like the look of you. Ooh, I like the look of you too. And they go like that, right? Now we're in a codependent relationship and neither of us are going anywhere, right? Bummer. Okay, so imagine if we're in a more functional way of relating where we're walking alongside one another and one person might come behind and support, and the other person might, or we might go on our own journeys for a little bit and then come back together, right? But it's not this. And I have seen a lot of this in relationship and in my own relationship as well. And I thought it was codependency, but I was wrong, right? Because I hadn't learned about the black magician. So the codependent relationship, the way I teach it is two circles overlapping, right? There's a dependency there. That's the other way of doing it. Black magician is represented by two circles, one on the outside and one on the inside. And the way that you can describe it or visually represent it, illustrated like this, right? There's the black magician, and then there's the black hole. Right, and this was named a little bit after we hadn't had the central bit. This is the person controlling that has the power over, right, in the relationship. And this is the person being controlled. And when I learnt about this, it all landed, and I was like, oh my God. And no, I wasn't the controlled, right? I was actually a black magician. And that was a hard pill to swallow, yeah, when I realized that I'd been controlling every single one of my relationships. And this is the level of what's the word I'm looking for? Sort of sleuth of, undercover, under the surface, because outwardly I wasn't a power over kind of person. I wasn't aggressive or, I was manipulative, and I would control in ways that the people around me had to fall into line, right? It was my way or the highway. There were no two-way streets in my relationships. I was the black magician. And what it meant was that everyone around me had to walk around on eggshells, right? Otherwise I would lose it. And when that all landed for me, because in my childhood, if I go back, I was in those dynamics. And it was the male in the household who was the black magician, and my mother was the black hole, right? And because I didn't want to be the black hole, I took the role of the black magician. So I didn't have any awareness of this. And these relationship modes, there's 4 of them. There is one function mode, which is the one that I was sort of talking about before, which 2 circles, right? Joined, yeah, they're connected, but they're not overlapping and merging into each other where you're losing yourself in the relationship. And I did that 100%. So definitely codependent traits or threads through my relationships. I remember, when I separated from my husband, and this is a real telling sign that's kind of embarrassing. I'd go to the mall, right? And I'd park the car. I wouldn't know where I'd parked it because that was his, he would be doing that, right? He would take care of that. And I know so many women that come out of relationships, they have no idea what to do with money because they have no financial literacy because that was the man's department, right? And so many men that I work with who have no idea about children because that was her department. And now they've got the kids half the time and they don't know what to do with them, right? So, and this is something that you and I have started really speaking about, is the different ways that we are now living because people aren't having to stay in their codependent, power and control. Aloof is the other one. right? So functional, connected, but not overlapping, not power and control, but aloof, avoidance, right? Not connected at all. Big spaces, big avoidance, big withdrawal. Yeah. So I played in all of these different relationship types, and we do with different people, yeah, different types of relationships. But those modes are here, and when we understand them, when we have awareness around them, we can start to track them, and we can start to chuck that spanner in and disrupt them, right? So there's a little bit about relationship modes. I was saying something else. What was I saying? I can't remember. There was something else that I was just touching on, but I might have moved away from it.
So we haven't covered it officially, but trauma bonds.
Ooh.
And has that just opened a new Pandora's box?
Yeah, I mean, look, trauma bonds, trauma. I mean, this is okay. So I've got a piece, a very powerful piece in one of my programs, which is all about attraction, right? And I work with people a lot around this because the attraction piece is the trauma bond. Right? It's like, oh, but oh my God, there's chemistry, right? And it's like, oh, it's that. It's the, oh. If there's a flaw, right, run in the other direction because that is trauma bond, right there. And look, it's not, I mean, I'm jesting as well because if there's an awareness around trauma bonds and there's an openness, and now whenever I meet someone, if I'm going into a connection with someone, if I'm at the beginning of a relationship, because obviously my marriage, I separated 10 years ago, so I've been relating in different ways and learning a lot about relationships. And one of the first questions that I'll ask is, do you understand your own wounding, right? What's the worst thing that's happened to you in your early years, and how is the residue of that still impacting your everyday life, right? And if someone can answer that question, and you're both coming in, even if there is a bit of flaw there, then there's an openness to be able to work with that, right? Knowing that there's a trauma bond there, and understanding the difference between. Actually, I heard someone speaking about this. Is this a lovership, or is this a love? Oh God, how did she put it? Is this a love story? Yes, that was it. Is this a love story, or is this a life story? Because the love story is speaking to the attraction, the trauma bond, the chemistry, right? The life story is the values, the whether or not we're compatible, whether or not there's a life story here, a deeper relationship. And I think that's a really powerful distinction, because we had trauma bonds, and why? Okay, it's like, what is the trauma bond for? Because our relationships are opportunities to heal the wounds of our childhood if we allow
So that's practically like BBC has a great series called The Goodies. If you haven't seen The Goodies, it's really like an exploration of random things that they're unnoticed in society, and quite often other TV series. I mean, the episodic type of TV series like Neighbours, like Home and Away in Australia, and some of the other things, it'll just take too long to tell the story. So the Goodies in every episode tell a long-winded story in exaggerated terms and like really quick-winded things.
Yeah.
When people come to me as a buyer's agent, quite often they're transitioning to the next part of their children's lives. So either they're having a newborn or they're moving, their 5-year-old is about to go to school. And so they use a buyer's agent like me to find a house next to the school so that they can start off by walking their kids to school with them. And then as the kid turns 10, 11, 12, then they start walking to school by themselves. And then, of course, in high school, then they can catch a bus or public transport as the parent organises for them. When somebody starts off in one style of relationship, it might be a codependent or an interdependent or an independent, and then they transition, or maybe they started from a one negative point of relating, where all of a sudden one is controlling the other one. How do they move fast enough to stay together?
Ooh, that's a really good question. I have a lot of people who come and work with me, interested in coming to work with me, but they'll say my partner. And I actually have a PDF, you know, because we all have our PDFs, right? PDF download, and it's called
like a one pager.
yeah. Wow,
So
no,
one page is like the summary of what you do, but sometimes it's a 3 pager or 4 pager. But the idea is to just have like one cheat sheet,
yeah,
one blueprint, one PDF that'll give you all the secrets in one go.
yeah.
So what's your version of that?
Well, so this is a how to get your partner on board cheat sheet, right? And that's what it is. And the interesting thing is that, you know, most people in this situation just want to get their partner on board, right? How do I get my partner there? How do I get them wanting to do the work? How do I get them on board? And it's an interesting journey to go through because I know that I hid in my relationship. I hid behind my husband because I was terrified of standing out, right, on my own. And, you know, I just had conversations with my mother about where she'd come from. And I can see it, it's right there. And how she was trying to do that her entire relationship, right? We were having a very light giggle around a very deep theme because I love to bring lightness. It's powerful. Understanding that play is the biochemical opposite of trauma is huge. When you can bring lightness, when you can bring laughter into everything, especially parenting, we're winning because we are bringing a different frequency, right? And for all of us who are wounded, because we all are, there was no perfect parenting, it doesn't exist. And we all have trauma, we all have stuff that happened to us as kids of varying degrees, and that's a whole different conversation. And when we can bring play, because that's when it happened, right? That's when all this stuff happened to us, when we were supposed to be playing, right? But yet we were being wounded and, you know, we had all this stuff happen to us. So play is a portal, right, to deeper connection. Play is a portal to joy, right, which we had another conversation around. So I definitely bring it with play. But one of the things that we were talking about, just to bring it back to what I was actually talking about, was my mother was not allowed to wear trousers. My father forbid her to wear trousers, right? My father forbid her to drive a car. She did it anyway, which tells you something about my mother. She was like, I'm doing it anyway. But I was terrified to stand out on my own because I was conditioned that I needed a man, right? That I wasn't anything without a man, that my value was because of a man. Yeah. So understanding all of that, that's where I was coming from. So many of the partners that come to me about doing work are trying to get their partner on board. And I'm so grateful that I had a beautiful woman say to me, how about you just show up for yourself? And I was like, because that shone a light on the fact that was so desperately trying to get him to come and do it with me. So when I have people that are trying to get their partner on board and have the excuses that, well, there's no point in coming and doing work on relationships because my partner's not on board, this is what I have to say. Your relationship will change because you will change and you will bring a different version of you to your relationship. And the other person is going to respond to that different version. So you don't have to have both partners on board. What it may bring up is that you are wanting to be in two different places and that you are essentially doing that part of the journey, yeah, which makes people that want to be like that very uncomfortable, yeah. Codependency means that you can't have wings. So I'm going to clip your wings so that you don't fly away from me, right? And I don't know if you've had this experience. A lot of people people who are into personal development work and they want to fly, or they want to grow, they want to evolve and change. And some people, oh, well, you don't need to do that. Why would you do that? It might be your partner, it might be a sibling, it might be your parents, it might be your friends, because they don't want you to fly. They want you to stay here where it's comfortable and safe and warm and certain. So we clip each other's wings, right, to stay safe. Codependency. Boom, that's it right there. And if it starts to come up through the process of doing work that your partner is trying to clip your wings from either a codependent place or a power and control place, right? Either one of those modes, then you're not going to do it unless they're on board, right? Because there's a lot of fear. Well, if I do work and that means the end of my relationship, well, then what? Because there's a lot of fear, especially, not that there's not fear for men, but especially for women, because now that means I need to be financially independent. Now that means I need to stop hiding behind my husband. Now that means I need to stand up on my own right. Now that means I need to actually value myself without my partner. And if my value is attributed to my partner or my children, because that happens as well, then we're in trouble, right? So we don't want to do that. So I empower a lot of people to come and do the work for themselves. And a lot of the result of that is that their relationships change and shift and grow because they bring a different version of themselves to their relationship, which is amazing. Or on the other side of that, it means that relationships that shouldn't be together anymore end up dissolving. And, we had a conversation around this, around a lot of people staying in relationships that aren't bringing them joy, that aren't filling them up, that aren't, meeting their needs, for one way of putting it, for the children, or because, back in my mother's day, you didn't get divorced. That was not what you did. That was a no-no, right? And nowadays it's not like that anymore. However, we still have that conditioning that plays out, that it's not okay. So there's a lot there in terms of what keeps people in relationships, what keeps people in these dysfunctional entanglements, right? Either that, where, oh my God, we're living like flatmates, we're housemates, we're not actually in these relationships that are filling us up anymore, but we're too scared to actually branch out and be on our own.
There's a lot I could say about that, and I'm not going to.
Yeah.
So, um, on another topic, not that I'm avoiding. So, we talked a bit about the biochemistry, and we touched on oxytocin, we touched on dopamine, we spoke about epigenetics.
Yep.
So let's talk about the positive side of what happens when you come home and you hug your partner for 15 seconds. If you can stay physically entangled and you actually are sharing the intimacy and the emotional connections, and it doesn't have to be sexual, but the physical touch, just the way of being a human to human, just with that long term, not a peck on the cheek, how was your day, how was work, and that's it, but really the intimacy of the into me, I see paradigm. Tell me a bit more about the oxytocin and dopamine and how that works, especially internally in your biochemistry. How does that change your inside, your brain chemistry and physiology?
It's everything. It's everything. And I love that you touched on the non sexual touch, because for me, and I know that I'm not alone in this, intimacy was sex, and sex was intimacy. And sex, love, and intimacy were all mushed up in this ball, right? I didn't know how to distinguish them from each other. I got my sex, love, and intimacy needs met by one person, and that was what was expected. Your husband or your partner or your wife is your confidant, they're your lover, they're your everything. And I didn't understand that intimacy was a completely different thing, that you can bring intimacy into sex, and it makes it amazing. You can bring love into sex, and it makes it amazing. You don't have to love someone to have sex with them. You don't have to have intimacy in sex, because a lot of people have sex with the lights off, right? Intimacy, you see the other person, right? If the lights are off, the intimacy's not there, because intimacy happens here. Intimacy is when all of the masks drop and the armor is taken off, right? It's when you are essentially naked without being naked. It's not about being naked, it's about truth. It's about being real, it's about authenticity. And for a lot of people, that is not present because it just wasn't there. And that's like a huge part of what lights me up, is to not only have found intimacy in my own life by pulling apart these three pillars of relating, understanding what love is, understanding what intimacy is, and understanding what sex is as three separate things, and then starting to bring them together, into this beautiful experience. But the physicality, which I love that you touched on, because we all have physical needs. We all have connection needs. And for a lot of us, for many of us, they weren't met as children. I was talking to my mother about it the other day, and the misconceptions or the myths and the things that we just believe to be true, that you let your baby cry it out. That's what you do. I had a midwife that just told me to let my baby cry for 15 minutes and then go and see, oh, there, comfort, and then leave again, wait another 15 minutes. It was tearing my heart out, right? And I didn't understand why. And when I was given a book, my husband and I were given a book when we first had our first baby. And I remember him reading the book, and he was like, this just doesn't, there's something about this, like it's not landing. I'm not, and when he looked her up, this woman was not a parent. She was writing parenting books as a parenting expert, but she wasn't a parent. And I was like, what? Right? I just didn't, couldn't fathom it, but I get it, because it's a lot easier to tell someone that's a parent to let their baby cry it out when you've never had that experience of your heart being pulled out, because it's designed that way so that your kid survives, right? That all of these myths and these understandings, these things that parents were taught to do. Don't pick your baby up too much, you'll make a rod for your own back. Don't have your baby in bed for you, which exhausts parents, because having to get up and breastfeed, and I think it's more dangerous when you've got a tired mum sitting there. And I know women who have dropped their babies, right? There's a lot there. In terms of the connection, right? The physical connection, skin to skin contact, which is only a relatively new thing, right? I saw this incredible video where a baby was born stillbirth, right? Not breathing. They put this baby, this is going to bring tears. They put this baby on the mother's chest. The baby lay there for, I can't remember how much time it was. It was a significant amount. That baby came back to life because it attuned with the mother's heartbeat, right? The baby was pronounced dead when it was born. Skin to skin contact was what the baby needed, back in tune with the mother's heartbeat, which we've spoken about as well, because we all came from that space in the womb where we were attuned to our mother's heartbeat for the first 9 months of our lives. Yet we are so physically disconnected from each other. And my mother, in one of her open moments, which we have so much more of now that I don't have any resentment towards her or any blame towards her, which I work with a lot of people to move beyond blame and resentment to their parents, because they have a lot of it, because they don't understand one of the most vital pieces of information that I will share, because I know that your listeners will get a lot from this. When we expect our mothers and our fathers to love us in the way that we want them to, it's never going to happen, because our mums and dads are loving us in the way that they understand love according to their own individual sense of self. we are wanting to be loved according to our individual sense of self, and we're measuring love on different measuring sticks, and it's never going to meet. And when we understand that, when I started to understand that, I could understand that my mother's way of loving me was to be picking things off my clothes and, oh my God, you know, you can't wear that. And because she's trying to love me in the way that she knows how to love. And if I am not careful, if I'm not aware, that's a better way of putting it, I receive that as criticism. I receive that as not good enough. I receive that as not being worthy. I receive that in a disempowered way than her trying to love me, right?
I feel like I need to just address one thing, because there might be somebody there watching and, you know, crying your eyes out at the moment. So if you're triggered by this, it doesn't matter if we've given you 15 trigger warnings at the beginning. Lifeline is available. If you're going through trauma, if you've gone through trauma, if you're feeling like a lot of the deep conversations that we're having are a little bit too much for you, switch off, and ring your friends, ring for help. Make sure you look after yourself. You can come back and revisit this once things have settled for you, but you're in a safe space, and you might be in front of the computer, you might be watching this on your phone. It's okay. We're talking about pretty heavy stuff. I mean, you know, trigger warning, stillbirth. That's a big issue, and a lot of us have gone through losing a child through pregnancy, through a miscarriage, after birth, and using a young one, losing a young one, losing a parent. So there's a lot of things that happen in general life that can trigger somebody randomly. And sometimes just having that introspection and listening to this kind of deep conversation can remind you of something that you've been keeping hidden for a long time, and you've been pushing down. But if you think about an inflated ball that you're trying to push under the swimming pool water, it'll bounce back up. And if you're feeling that, it's okay to reach out, and it's okay to make the phone call, and it's okay to reach out to family, to friends, to Lifeline in Australia. And is there a similar version in New Zealand?
Yeah, absolutely.
What's that one called?
I think it's Lifeline as well, but there are
So-
things that you can reach out to.
So I know we're talking about some heavy topics here. You know, like coming back to oxytocin, the love is all around. So bringing it back into a little bit of a lighter side, and, you know, just understand that there's a lot of love in this room, and there's a lot of love around as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's heavy topics, and you know, we learn from those and we grow from those. So I just wanted to interrupt with that quick commercial break.
Well, I mean, I can bring it round, because one of the things that I did want to share when I spoke to my mum about, you know, we've opened up to each other with some really deep, and very powerful healing, right? Because it is when I can ask her questions about what she navigated in her lifetime and want to know the answers, right? Which is what opened up for me and her when I'd done what I needed to do on myself so that I got out of that resentful place, right? And one of the things that she shared with me was that her mother never hugged her, right? There was no physical connection. And I get it. My mum was born in the war, right? 1942, middle of the war. Just getting food on the table was the thing, right? A very survival way of being in the world. But what I wanted to share was every time she hugged me, right? She's going up against that conditioning, that normalized behavior. And when you say, I think you said 15 seconds, I think it's actually 20 seconds, the hug for the oxytocin to really start to kick in. And to normalize hugging, to bring in the normalization of non-sexual touch, that it's okay to receive touch from your friends. It's okay, you know, like the Italians, and, you know, kiss each other on the lips, right? And kiss each other on the cheeks, and men will do that. And, you know, it's just starting to, I guess, dismantle this old conditioning that we have, right? That it's not okay to be affectionate towards each other, and to provide and receive, ask for, gift, give, non-sexual touch in our relationships. Because when we do, when we are receiving non-sexual touch, when we have levels of deeper intimacy in our friendships, it takes the pressure off our primary relationship, right? Our romantic relationship. And it's one of the most beneficial things that we can do, because then we're not just loading that one relationship up with so much expectation that that person be our everything. It's going to kill it. It's one of the fastest ways to you know um, to end the relationship, to disconnect the relationship. And most people don't see it coming because it doesn't happen overnight, right? It's a gradual thing where we just start to feel the disconnection and we don't know what to do about it to bring it back, right? But there's so much expectation on the other person to be that everything. And when we can start to move and receive and give in these other areas of our life, it takes the pressure off. Yeah, it's huge stuff.
I love that. That was really well said.
Mm.
It's quite illustrative when you think about the other things that aren't spoken about, because it's, as you say, it's what we've learned from our parents or what we've learned from society around us. Spoke last week or the week before at the Women Changing the World Summit. And one thing I noticed as a man, there's three men speaking, but all the speakers before me, they came on stage, they spoke, they got a hug as they came off the stage. And, I'm coming off the stage. I didn't even get a high five. Everybody else is a woman. And I'm thinking, you know what? I should just call some of the men to come up and just to give me a hug coming down. It's like, hey, you did a good speech. Thank you for it. But, I'd never say anything on stage and say, hey, where's my hug? But that's the thing. And whether you're doing an A-frame hug, when you've got your shoulder to shoulder, just kind of make sure that you're not too intimate, too close.
Yeah.
Just as a well done kind of thing. That's very different to the intimate hug, the loving hug, that 15 to 20, 25-second thing that brings you the oxytocin. It's very different.
Mm-hmm.
And so, at the end of the day, you need to read the room. You're not going to be able to just go up to give everybody a free hug, even if you're holding up a sign of free hugs. So, look, read the room, read the situation, and you'll always know internally how things are balanced. And it might be a balance of power, it might be a balance of business. But Jacqueline, you and I spoke about the internal feeling versus the story that we tell to ourselves later on. Without throwing up any red flags and starting an internet fight with the keyboard warriors, give me the brief version of, and again, this is going to be another trigger warning, so I'm not going to censor myself, but I'll censor myself sometimes. So talk to me a bit about, how do you know when it's okay to put your arm around somebody of the opposite sex, somebody of the same sex?
Mm-hmm.
I've been in a situation at work where I've worked with a gay man and I'm straight. And, there was a little bit of the overtouching, the oversharing that just didn't feel right. But you can read it and you can move away. If you're taking responsibility for yourself and you move away and you tell the other person,